Today you're going to learn how to create a footer for your website, and we're actually starting to get to the point where we now have a complete front page that we can actually use for our website. There are a couple of things that we need to talk about before we can end off the front page though, so even though we are technically creating a footer in this episode, that would technically mean that we're done with the front page. There are a couple of things that you need to know in order to make this fully finished in that sort of sense. One of those things is that we need to make sure we make this responsive so we can actually fit this into different devices. And we also need to talk about something called validation. Now, validating your website is something that a lot of people, they miss out on when it comes to creating a website, which is a very important step to do. Essentially, you take your website and you submit it to a validator online, and it tells you if there's anything you need to change inside the HTML when it comes to this website here. Another important step to do is to make sure we include a sitemap into the website. And when I say sitemap, there are technically two different types of sitemaps. The one we're going to talk about today is the HTML sitemap, which is something we do for the sake of the user inside the website, so they have a place they can go and find all the different subpages very easily somewhere inside your website. We do also have something called an XML sitemap, and that is something that is a bit more technical, something you don't actually visually see inside the website, and this is something we create in order to make search engines know exactly what is inside our website a lot faster than without a sitemap. So an XML sitemap is not something we're going to talk about today, but we will talk about a HTML sitemap. So as you can see, I have a design in front of me here, and this is the latest version of this website. So everything is centered. The changes we made in the previous episodes are in here. And as you can see, I do have a footer at the bottom here. And the idea behind the footer is a couple of different things, because a lot of people, they think about a footer and they might think different things. What is important to have inside your footer is three things, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions, just to mention it. The first job your footer has is to make sure that whatever you're selling on your website, whether it being a product, a service, yourself, whatever, it has to be a last go at trying to sell that product to the user inside your website. So in my case here, I am inside a portfolio. I'm trying to sell myself because I want to get a job, maybe creating a website or something. So as a last attempt, I do have a couple of people that said something good about me inside my footer. And I included one last button to get in touch with me so that people can actually get in touch with me. We could actually make this a little bit more easier to see. There we go, get in touch with me. So now people know exactly what this button does. Essentially, this is going to try and sell myself as a web developer or just a multimedia designer trying to get my product out there. And just like how it's very important that we do actually sell ourselves inside the hero section of the website at the top here, it's also very important that we try to sell ourselves at the bottom of the web page, because this footer here is going to appear inside every web page inside our website, just like how the header appears inside every page inside the website. So we want to make sure that the footer is selling us in some sort of sense so we can actually get our product out there. Another thing we want to make sure we have inside the footer is of course a sitemap, and this is what we call a HTML sitemap. Now HTML sitemaps are for the user, like I said, so it's more for, like, let's say the user can't find a certain thing inside your website. Let's say you have a small drop down menu from the side, but the user hasn't seen it, and they're kind of like, how do I get to his cases? I want to see what he's done for other clients. Then we want to make sure we include all the different subpages inside the footer of the website to make sure we include a sitemap so that people can just very easily find whatever they're looking for without having to crawl around the website to try and find it. Another thing I like to include inside my websites, again, depending on what kind of website you're making, because in some cases this might not make any sort of sense at all. But in some cases you might want to have some contact info. So if you have a phone number, or if you have an email or an address or something that you want people to know in order to get in touch with you, this is not my address, by the way. No one come and visit me. Then it's a very good idea to have some contact info, just so people can, if you have customer service or something inside your website, then people should be able to get in touch with customer service. There's nothing more I hate than going to a website that has a product they sell or something, and there's something wrong with it, and I have to get in touch with customer service, and then you have to dig through the website to find it. I know it is kind of like a sales tactic, because they want to filter out the people that aren't super serious about getting in touch with them, so that only the really serious people will actually push through to get to the customer service. But in some cases, it's just kind of nice to have, contact info or an email or something so people can message you because they want to buy a product from you, so they should be able to get in touch with you. Some people, they hate, by the way, when you have a button like this that says get in touch with me and you have to click one extra time to get to the contact info, some people just like scrolling down to the bottom, getting the contact info, and then calling you immediately because they know they want to get in touch with you and they don't want to scroll through your entire website to find it. So it's very important that you also keep in mind that the fewer clicks people have to do inside your website to get what they want is a lot better, because you lose a lot of people each time there's a new click they have to do. That is actually something that not a lot of people know, but the more clicks you have inside your website, the more people get lost. So with the design here, let's actually go ahead and get started on creating this footer. So what I'll do is I'll go inside my website, and we have to kind of think about what kind of content we want to have inside the footer. So if we were to scroll down inside my index page, I'm just going to create another comment down here because I like to create comments, so I know exactly what I'm doing. And inside this comment, I'm going to say, let's actually just copy paste what we have up here. So we're going to say the footer of the website, just so we know exactly what this is. So the footer. So what I'll do in here is I want to make sure that we actually set up the HTML first, and then we can start styling it afterwards. That's just a really good way I like to do things. You can jump back and forth between HTML and CSS, but I like to have all the HTML in place so I know exactly that everything is like it's supposed to be. So when I don't start styling things, you know, oh, I had to make changes to the HTML now, so that's going to affect my styling. And that is not a good thing because now I waste a lot of work. So I like to do all the HTML first. So going inside the design here, we can see that we have one section here, we have one section here, and then we can keep doing that. So we have 5 different boxes that are going to have people saying something good about me. We're also going to have a small button here at the bottom. Now this one is actually going to take up a lot of space, so it's actually going to take up the entire width that we have down here. Then we're also going to have a bottom section down here, and this is actually going to be one box in itself that is going to have a bunch of sub boxes. So we can actually do something like, let's do this. So we know exactly this is one box, and then inside of this one, we have one box here, we have one box here, one box here. Now this section here, by the way, could be more links to your website, but because we don't have a lot of links right now inside this particular website here, I just decided to include some text in here instead. This would get replaced by more links, maybe, if you start getting more links inside your website. And then we have this box over here. So this is what we need to create using HTML, and just kind of need to visualize it before we get started. So with this, we know that we have to create 5 different div boxes for these people that are here. We do need to create one link, and then we need to create one div box that has 4 other div boxes inside of it. Or instead of 4 div boxes, because now we start getting into div-itis, so we create boxes and boxes and boxes where they're not actually needed. So let's go ahead and create 4 different unordered lists instead of 4 boxes in here, because we would have to create a box and then create the unordered list inside the box when we can just do without the box, essentially. So with that, let's go ahead and do that inside our HTML. We're just going to delete everything here. And I'm going to go ahead and create a footer tag, because this is not a section, this is a footer that we're creating. Inside the footer, I'm going to create a div box, and I'm going to name this div box something specific. So we're going to say, give it a class. This one is going to be called footer-testimony. Isn't that what you call it? Testimony, when people, they say something. Testimony-1. Just so we, have something in here for this, for the naming here. Inside of this one, we need to have 2 things. We need to have a image, and we also need to have a piece of text. So I'm going to include a image, and I'm going to link to an image that I already found. So just to show it, inside my root folder, I have my image folder here, and inside my image folder, I created a portraits folder. Inside this one, I have 5 different images from the people that has a testimony. I just called them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You could call them the name of the person who gave you the testimony or something else. Doesn't really matter. You just need to make sure you link to the right image inside your HTML. So what I'll do is I will go ahead and go inside my image folder. I will go inside my portraits, which is right here, and then I'll find number 1. I will call this one testimony. Let's just call it testimony. I think that's quite good. Underneath here, we're going to include a paragraph, which is going to have the text that I want to have for this particular person. Now, in my case here, I just found some random text, which is, again, lorem ipsum. It's just going to stay the same for all the people here. But in your case, you would, of course, swap this out with people who said something and actually what they said about your service to make sure it's not something random. So with this here, I can actually just copy paste. Do that so we have 5 of them in total, and I can just change it from 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Actually, I just noticed something here which does not make sense at all. So I made a small error here, which is that we don't actually need to have a number behind the testimony. Let's just go and delete that because there's absolutely no need for the class name to have a number because they're all going to be styled the same way. You do need to make sure the images have different names though, just to mention it. So after doing this, what we can actually do just to kind of separate everything, just create a little bit of spacing so we know exactly what is going on here. So this is the testimony section. Now we want to create a anchor tag that is going to be the link that lets the person watching the website get in touch with me. So what I can do is I can copy the text in here, so get in touch with me, and make sure that we create a 100 width of this inside the CSS later on. So we're just going to include the text here, and we're going to go ahead and create a link. Now in this case, it's just going to be a placeholder, so we're just going to say hashtag. Then we want to create the next section, which is the bottom part. So I'm going to create a div container. Inside this div, I'm going to give it a class, and I'm going to name this one footer dash sitemap. And what I want to do is I want to make sure we include a unordered list. Inside this unordered list, we're going to create a list item, and inside the list item, we're going to create a link. Make sure that you include a hashtag inside where you lead the person to, because we don't actually have a link to other sub pages. Again, at some point when you create more sub pages, you're going to have to replace all the links inside your front page. But for now, we don't have a page, so let's just go ahead and leave it like this. And what I want to do is I want to include some text. So I do have some text in here. So essentially, we're just taking the navigation right now and replacing that. So what I can do is I can say home, actually just make everything big, copy paste. So we have 4 of them in total, and I can say gallery, I can say about me, and I can say contact. Then I can copy paste this unordered list and paste it down below. I want to make sure this one has the links to my different cases pages because that's what I have so far inside my website. So web development. Now I do actually, just to mention it, I did change something inside my website design here. If I were to go up, you can actually see I changed my Photoshop to graphic design. So I do want to make sure I do that inside this website here as well. So going up to where we have Photoshop, let's actually go ahead and change that to graphic design inside the category section. Just a small change here just to make this look a little bit better. So after this, I want to make sure we name this one film production. I do also want to call the next one video editing, and then of course graphic design. Next, I do want to create a additional one, so we're just going to paste this one below. Now this one is just going to have 1 because so far I don't actually have more links. If you did have more links inside your website, you would just create another one of these unordered lists and start filling in these. But in this case here, right now, I just have a piece of text. So let's actually just go down, copy this piece of text here, paste it inside one of these, just so we have them. And this is not going to be an anchor tag, by the way. Let's actually go and wrap this so we can see it. This is not going to be an anchor tag. This is going to be a paragraph. So we can just go and delete everything else in here. Now I'm going to copy paste the last unordered list up here, paste it down below. And I'm going to just give this one the contact info. So get in touch. We can call this one get in touch. And then we can include the information that I have in here. So we can say a phone number. Let's just copy paste everything. Just paste it below here so I can copy paste it really quick. So we have a phone number I can paste in. I have a random email address. And I do also have a random address I can paste in. So just delete everything that we pasted in down there. And just like this, we now have everything we need inside our website. So what I'll do is I'll go back inside the page. Inside our actual browser, I will refresh and just kind of see what we have so far inside the footer. So as you can see, we do have all the information in here. We do have all the HTML, but we don't actually have any sort of styling. So that's the next step we got to do. Now, we did actually include a background for the entire website that right now has this dark color. And that was just kind of to make sure that we didn't blow our eyes out when we actually started creating this website at the very beginning, when we started creating the header inside the website. But it is important, I think, to make sure that even though the background color of the website has a dark color that you might, oh, you know what, let's just reuse this for the footer. I do think it's important that we do create a footer background itself, because if we at some point later on decide to change the background color because it's messing with something inside the website, it's just a good idea to not have that mess up the footer if we decide to do that. So let's go inside our website. Go inside the index.css. Actually, we're going to go inside our main.css because the footer is going to be inside every page inside our website. So let's go down to the bottom of main.css, create a comment, and say this is our footer. So the first thing I want to do in here is I want to target my footer. And the thing we need to keep in mind here when it comes to creating a footer or a header inside the website is that there might actually be more than just one header or more than one footer inside the website. For example, if I have an article, then that article inside my page can have a header and a footer in itself. So if we just create a generic footer or header styling that we target them, then it can mess with things inside our website. So we do want to make sure that going back inside the index page, that our main footer up here does actually have a class. So we can call this one footer dash main. I do think we did the same thing when it came to the header. So just to kind of like check this out, we do have a header dash main. So it is very important that we do this because, like I said, it can mess with things inside the website. So inside my CSS file, I'll copy my footer dash main and paste that in. And I want to say that first of all, I want to give this a width, which is going to be 100%, which is the entire width of the browser. Then I do also want to give it a padding. And this padding is actually going to be slightly different because just like any other section inside the website, it's going to have 60 pixels from the top. It is going to have 0 from left and right, but we do want to include 100 pixels at the bottom. And it doesn't have to be 100 pixels specifically, but I just like to give the user just a little bit extra spacing at the bottom there so the content can scroll a little bit further up for them to see. So our sitemap is not all the way at the bottom of the browser, you know, when they start seeing it. So I just like to create a little bit of extra spacing. What I'll do too here is I'll create a background color. And I do actually have a color picked out inside my design, which is hashtag 141414, which is a very dark gray color. I'm going to save this just so we can see how this looks like inside our website. So going back in here, we can actually refresh, and then you can see the background became slightly darker, you know, just so we had a little bit of darkness going on, and the content got pushed down a little bit so we have a little bit more spacing. Now in the last video, we talked a bit about creating a wrapper, and that is actually something I want to do in this episode as well, since a wrapper is going to allow for us to put everything on the same line. So right now, all this content inside my about section is inside a wrapper, which allow for the website to be very aligned in all its content. So we want to do the same thing when it comes to all the footer content. So we do actually need to go back inside our index page, and right after we open up the footer main, I want to give it a div that is going to be called class, which is set equal to wrapper dash main, which is the class we included inside our main.css at the very top in the last episode. So as you can see, we have a main wrapper here that has a certain width, and which is also being centered because we have a margin set to 0 auto. So doing this, we can actually allow for all the content to be structured inside a certain wrapping, so it doesn't go further out than we want it to. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure we close off the div right before the closing footer tag. So we're just going to go ahead and do that, and everything is just should get shifted out just to make sure that everything looks neat and tidy. Again, I have an add-on installed that does this automatically for me, but just make sure you shift everything out so you can tell what is what inside your HTML. So with the wrapper in here, what I can actually do is I can go inside my browser just to test this out. And as you will see, everything gets shifted out. Everything is aligned perfectly. So they're actually touching the same border inside our website to just make sure everything looks very structured. So now I can probably see the effect of having a wrapper and how it makes everything look a little bit better when it comes to aligning things. The next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that flex is applied to this wrapper here, because we want everything to be, you know, stretching, or the flow of the content should be like it's supposed to. So what I want to do is I want to go down to my footer, and I'm going to call this one class footer dash main dash flex, because we want to make sure we apply some flex styling. Now this is what we call a modifier, because we're modifying existing HTML. So we're not actually styling it as the main styling, but we're just adding a class that we can put on top of anything inside the footer and just kind of like modify how it behaves. So in this case here, we want to have a display set to flex. I do also want to make sure that everything is justify content to the center, to make sure everything is centered inside this container here. Whoops, I did actually rename this incorrect. Make sure we have a dash in here. So what we want to do is we want to apply this class to our wrapper. So I'm going to save everything, go inside the index file, and inside my footer down here, I want to go inside the wrapper, and I want to make sure we add that class in there. So we have the wrapper main, and we also have footer main flex. So doing that is going to allow for me to go inside my website, and now I can see everything's just kind of like gets put how we want it to. Now currently, our content is not behaving the way we want it to. And that is because nothing is wrapping inside this flex styling. So everything is trying to get squished into one line in there, and we don't want to do that. So we want to go back inside our styling, and we want to say that not just do we want to display this as centered, but we do also want to make sure that the flex wrap is set to wrap. So if we do that, go back inside the website, refresh it, you can now see everything is moving down to other lines. So the next step we need to do is make sure that all these different testimonies can actually fit inside one line. And a very easy way to do that is by going in and saying we want to have our testimony. So we say footer dash testimony. We want to paste that in. So we have that inside our styling. Now, the first thing I want to do here, just to make sure everything is just a little bit easier to mess around with, is I want to style the image inside these containers here. So I'm going to copy paste and target the images inside these containers, and I want to give them a fixed width. Now we're just going to make sure that the width has 100% of the containers inside of. Now right now that is going to look very weird inside the browser because it is going to get even bigger now. But what I want to do now is I want to adjust the sizing of each of these containers that the images are inside of. So if we were to take the entire width we have available to us right now, that is 100%. We want to have 5 testimonies inside this particular horizontal line. So if we take 100 divided by 5, we get 20. So each of these containers here, so we're going to say we have a flex basis, should have 20% in width. If I were to do this, go back inside the browser, refresh it, you can now see everything fits inside one line here. Let's go in here, and instead of 100% for the width of the images, let's go ahead and make sure that these are maybe 60%. Let's go ahead and see how that looks like. And that is a little bit more like how I want it to. I do also want to add a border radius on these images here just to make sure it look a little bit nicer. So we're going to say border dash radius, and we're going to set this one to, let's just set it to 100 pixels just to make sure they're well rounded. So we're going to do that. You can now see we have round images in here. With this, the next thing we want to do is make sure that the content is centered inside these containers here. So what I can do is I can go inside my CSS, and I can actually go and add another flex box inside the testimony containers. So we can say display as flex, and I want to go in and say I want to justify content, and we want to center this. But we do also want to make sure we wrap things, because if we don't do that, if I were to save this, go inside the browser, you'll actually notice that we start getting this where it like tries to squeeze itself in on one line, just like before. So we go back in, and we want to make sure we have a flex wrap set to wrap. And that will actually allow for us to wrap this down on another line. So with this, everything is now centered. We do want to make sure the text in here is also centered, because right now it is not quite going to do it, because it is just going to take the text all the way from left to right. But as you can see in the second line down here, it's not actually centered inside the page. And that's because we need to actually go ahead and style the text itself. So going inside the styling, we're just going to copy paste the footer testimony and say we want to style the paragraph instead. And we want to text align center, because if we were to do that, it is going to allow for us to actually align the text directly. So everything is aligned to the center when it comes to the text inside the testimony. And now this is a good point to take a look at the design and just double check that everything is like it's supposed to be. If I go inside my design here, you can see, oh, we do actually have slightly smaller images, and we do have a little bit more spacing in between. And the text is also a little bit bigger. So it's actually not the text size that we usually use. It is 16 pixels. So we want to make sure we start adjusting things so it looks like this. So inside the CSS, I'm going to adjust the size of the image a little bit. So instead of 60%, let's actually try 50. I think that's quite a bit smaller. We're also going to style the text a little bit. So we're going to say we want the font size to be 16 pixels. And I do also want to have some distance, because right now, if we were to go inside the browser just to show you, we don't actually have any spacing between the text here, unless it has a word that wraps down to the next line and creates that extra bit of spacing. So we want to make sure we also have a padding happening here. So padding, is going to be 0 from the top and bottom, at least for now. And then we want to include maybe a 20 pixel padding on the left and right. So doing this, saving and refreshing, you can now see that we have something that looks a lot better. If I were to compare inside my design here, we do need to have a little bit of spacing at the top there so we don't have it right up against the image. So that is one thing that we want to make sure we do here. So I want to say we also have a padding to the top, or we could actually just go inside this styling here and say we want to set it to 20 pixels from the top and then 0 from the bottom. So going inside the website, refreshing, you can now see we have that extra bit of spacing. And now it does kind of look like what I have inside my design here. So this is what we want to have. So now that we have the testimonies in order, let's actually go ahead and start styling this button down here, because the button is randomly sitting right next to all these different unordered lists down here. So going inside, I want to go in and grab the styling for the paragraph, paste it below. And I'm just going to go ahead and say I want to target the anchor tag, not inside the testimony, but just the anchor tag inside my footer-main. Now, when it comes to the styling inside this anchor tag, I just realized that we do actually need to target this using a class. Otherwise, this is not quite going to work, because we have many anchor tags inside our HTML. So you can see inside our actual anchor tag that we're trying to style here, we do also have a bunch inside the sitemap section down here. So if I were to just style a anchor tag, I'm styling all of them. So we do need to make sure we go in here and give this one a class. So we're going to set this one to footer-link or get in touch or something. Let's actually do that. That sounds a lot better. So get in touch. So copying this name here, we can go inside our CSS, paste that in instead. Inside the anchor tag, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a padding, because I want to have this border around the link that looks really nice. So I want to give this one a padding of 10 pixels and 20 pixels on the sides. Then I want to give this one a border. I'm going to set this one to 4 pixels, and it's going to be a solid line. And I want to make it white. Now, doing this is not going to give us quite the results that we want to have inside the website. So if we were to refresh it, you can see that we're getting sort of like this weird thing here. Now, what I want to do is I want to make sure that this anchor tag is going 100% of the width inside the website. But that is going to get a little bit messed up by the fact that if I were to do that, then the border is also going to be 100% of the width inside this section here. So what we want to do instead is we want to take this bottom section with the sitemap and make that 100% to make sure that this jumps down to the next line and doesn't do this weird thing where it stretches. So what I can do is I can go back in here and I want to copy my styling for this get in touch and instead say sitemap, because that is the last section we have to style in here. And I will give this one a flex basis, and I want to make it 100%, just to make sure that is the basis for the sizing inside this particular one here. So saving this one is going to allow for everything to jump down into the next line. Now, I do kind of think that the border might be a little bit too thick when it comes to the get in touch with me, because it is kind of like a lot thicker than the text itself. So I want to start by going in and actually styling the text. So inside our get in touch, I want to say the font weight is going to be 900, just to test it out. So if we were to actually try this and save it, you can see it gets a lot thicker. It might be a little bit too thick. So let's go back in here, make this 600 instead. So I'm going to say 600, and then the border is going to be 2 pixels instead. So going back inside the website, refreshing, this looks a lot nicer, I think. So what I'll do is I'll push it down a little bit, because it is kind of sitting up against the testimony section. So we want to say we also want to create a margin. And let's make sure that this is from the top and bottom to make sure there's a bit of distance. So I want to say 40 pixels from the top, and I do want to say 0 from the left and right, and then maybe something like 60 pixels from the bottom, just to make sure you have a bit of space into that next section down there. So going back in, refreshing, you can now see we have a little bit of distance going on. Right now, we don't actually have any sort of hover effect when it comes to this particular link here, so we could also include that in here. So going back inside our styling, we can take our get in touch and create a hover for this one. So when we hover on top of this thing, then we want to change something. And you can really decide whatever you want to change in here. I think I will go ahead and decide that the border should change in color. So I want to make this one into the variable that we have set inside our main.css at the top. So as you can see, we have this color up here. So we can actually go and grab this one. So I'm just going to copy the name of it and say I want to include that as my color. So we're going to say va parentheses, then paste in the color that we have here. So site color number 1. And when I do that, I go back inside the website, refresh it. You can now see it changes color. And we can, of course, also add a slower transition if you want to do that. So going up here inside our link, I can say transition. I want to transition everything inside the hover effect. I want to ease in and out. And I want to do this using 200 milliseconds. So we get a little bit of a smoother transition going on here, so it doesn't get so instant. Now that we have that, we can now go ahead and start styling the next section down here, which is all the unordered lists that we have. The first thing I want to do is I want to make sure that all the content are going next to each other using a flexbox styling. So I can go back inside my CSS. And at the bottom, we do already have a sitemap styling down here. So what I can just do is apply a display flex. And this is already going to go in and make some major changes to that section down there. So as you can see, everything jumps next to each other. So the next step is to make sure they're all sized appropriately inside the footer there. So I can go back in here and say I want to target the footer dash sitemap. And in this case, I want to target the unordered list, but go for a nth child. I'm going to say I want to grab the first child, which means that we're going to target the first unordered list inside this particular container. And I want to give it a flex basis. So I'm going to say flex basis is going to be 200 pixels, just to test it out here. So going back inside the website, refresh, you can now see we get a little bit of distance here. If I were to take a look at my design, you can see that it's a bit too much of a distance than what I designed inside my little thing here. So let's go ahead and decrease that to 180 instead of 200. So 180, going back in here, refresh, and I think that's a little bit better. So I want to do the same thing for the second one. So I can just go ahead and copy paste it down and say I want to do nth child and the second one. We could also just add this inside one line up here, since essentially that would be a shorter way of doing things. So let's actually go and do that instead, because I do think that we should learn how to do things in a more practical manner. So going right after the nth child one, we're going to say comma and then paste in the path for the second one, so they receive the same styling. Going inside the website, we can now refresh it, and then you can see we get the same styling for this particular one down here. Now, the third one is also going to have a flex basis. However, it is going to be different. So let's actually go and paste down and say we want to target the third one. And this one, let's go and give it a 280. Now, it's not quite the sizing that I want it to be inside the footer here, but I do also notice that everything is not capitalized when it comes to this piece of text here. So let's actually go inside our styling here and scroll down to the bottom, paste in our styling, and target the paragraph itself. So let's say we have a sitemap and we have a paragraph in here, and I want to give it a text transform to uppercase, just to make sure everything is uppercase inside this footer down here. So as you can see, things are sizing a little bit different. So let's make sure that we actually give it a little bit more spacing. So we're going to say 320 just to test it out. Refresh the page, and that looks a lot better. We could maybe give it a little bit more spacing. So let's make it 340 just to test this one out. So going inside the website, refreshing, and then you can see we get something look quite a bit neater inside our website here. So what I want to do is I do also want to make sure that this content over here on the right side is going all the way to the right side. And if I were to right click and inspect this, we can actually see that right now it is not registering this UL as being the as stretching for the space that is left over, because right now we have all this spacing here, but it's not being used. So what we can do is we can go inside our styling here and say we want to grab the fourth nth child. So we can go down to the bottom here. So we want to grab the fourth one. And I want to say I want to do a flex grow. And I want to set this one to 1. If I refresh the browser, you'll actually see that there's no changes happening inside the website. But if I were to right click inside this last section here, you'll actually notice that it is stretching all the way from left to right. So it's taking up that empty space that is on the right side. So what I can do now is I can tell it that the content inside this container here should go to the right side inside the spacing that is available. So what I can do is I can go inside my CSS and I will copy paste what we have here, paste it below. And I want to say I want to target the list items inside this particular unordered list here. And then I want to give it a float right. And the reason I'm doing this is because this is going to be a lot simpler when it comes to just simply putting things on the right side inside this particular container here. So what I'll do is I'll add a float right, which is not going to make it work completely like I want it to. So if I were to go in and refresh the website, you'll see that it is going to the right side, but float also means that we're going to put things next to each other if there's space for it. So what I can also do is I can say before each of these list items, if there's any float going on from the previous list item, I want to clear it. So what I can do is I can say clear both, which means we're going to clear both left and right floats happening inside this particular styling here. So essentially, we're clearing any sort of existing floating happening, and then we're floating to the right. Then on the next list item, we're clearing all the float happening, then moving it to the right. That is essentially what is going on here. So we're to save this, go inside my browser, refresh the website. You can now see everything is going on the right side. So using float in this kind of way is another small trick for you to learn. Of course, if there is a situation where a flexbox is more appropriate, then of course always prioritize using flexbox first. But just to show that you can also use float in this kind of way, you can do that using clear. So with this, we now need to make sure that we have the line height being the appropriate amount for all these different list items that we have in here. So what I can do is I can go back inside my styling and say that we have this sitemap. And inside this sitemap, we have a anchor tag, or actually we have a lot of anchor tags in here. And I want to style the text of all of these. So right now, the paragraphs inside our website has a line height set to 30. And I want to do the same thing when it comes to these different list items. So I can actually say we want to have a line height. I'm going to set this one to 30 pixels. If I do that, go back inside my website, refresh it, you can now see everything is matching up with the paragraph that we have here because we have the same line height. And the styling is actually the same styling when it comes to our paragraph, so that's fine as well. I do want to do one more thing, which I do have inside my design, which is to make sure there's this small little pink border on the left side of the first menu item down here, just to give a little bit of a design. So going back inside our CSS, the first child that we have here is going to have its separate styling. So I'm just going to copy it, make sure that we add the curly brackets, and then we just simply go in and say we want to add a border left, and I want to add a 2 pixel border that is solid, and I want to add a color, which in this case is our variable that we set with the site color. So we just paste that in here. I do also want to create a small padding to the left side because we need to have a little bit of spacing. I'm just going to make it 20 pixels. So if we go back inside the website, refresh it, you can now see we have a small border here, and you can just kind of decide if you want to adjust it a little bit to make it look a little bit different. I think this is fine for now. Maybe adding a little bit of a thicker border could probably be an idea. So let's go ahead and make this one 4 just to see how it looks like. So if I refresh it, that looks a lot better, I think. And the last final touch upon this little section down here at the bottom is to make sure that all the different anchor tags have a hover effect. So we actually get some sort of feedback when we put our mouse cursor on top of them. So going inside our anchor tag styling here, I want to add a hover effect. I want to say anchor tag and hover. And I want to set this one to a new opacity. So whenever I go inside this particular link down here, I want to change the opacity to 0.6 just to see how it looks like. So going back inside the website, refreshing, you can now see that when I hover on top of them, we get a different opacity just to get some sort of feedback from it. I might have added a slightly bit too much opacity here. So let's go ahead and make this one 8 instead, which is 80%. So if we were to refresh, you can now see that we have just a slight effect happening down here. It's not going to happen for the text here, of course, because that is text, so we can actually interact with it. These over here are actually seen as links right now, so that probably shouldn't be a thing. So going back inside our HTML, we want to go down to the last section here and just make sure that these are paragraphs and not anchor tags. So we're just going to change all of these to make sure they fit with the type of content that we have in here. Now doing that is going to change them, so now we can't actually click them anymore, which is perfectly fine. That's what we want them to do. So with this, we now have everything the exact way that we want them to be inside our page. In the next couple of videos, we're going to start talking a bit about creating these different other types of things that we want to have inside a page. For example, making it responsive, or creating a sitemap, or actually validating this website inside a validator to make sure that everything is technically correct. So we want to make sure we do various things to this particular page here to make everything proper. so to speak. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you guys in the next video.